not necessarily tribal or regional. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's Daybreak on Trust Television. It's that segment where we bring you all that have made it to some of the major newspapers in the country. And as usual, we would begin with the Daily Trust. And on the Daily Trust this morning, it's leading with the political issue, national dynamics, vote delivery to determine National Assembly leadership. Tinubu, Shatima, APC leaders hold maiden meeting. Push for Northwest, Southeast Senate presidency intensifies. And ruling party working on a tightrope. And that is according to Kari. You'll find the details of that story on page 4. Two other stories. Kaduna Road, second Niger Bridge, ready May 15th. That is according to the federal government. You'll find that story on page 10. And Bonn rejects planned auction of 600 megahertz broadcast spectrum by NCC. It appears that two agencies with concurrent jurisdiction are fighting over who the right person is to auction the spectrum. We'll see how that pans out. Sudan, FG spends 560 million to evacuate Nigerians by road. Nigeria is a very special country. Two other stories there on the front page. Nigerians likely among as Kenyan church cult death toll hits 95. I have no drug case, dual citizenship scandal, Atiku replies Tinubu. And 2 soldiers, 15 villagers killed in Benue. The killings in Benue of recent have become indeed a thing of concern. And of course we have a picture there, proportional from the president and Group Chief Executive Officer, Transcorp Corporation, Dr. Owen Omogiafo, and Group Chairman, Transcorp, Mr. Tony Elumelu, and the independent non-executive director of Transcorp, Mrs. Foluke Abdurazak, at the 17th Annual General Meeting of Transcorp Corporation, the Nigeria's largest listed conglomerate, held virtually on Wednesday. These are the major stories on the front page of the Daily Trust.
And for the Nigerian News Direct newspaper, starting from the top, court strikes out forfeiture suit against Governor Bello. 2 former governors behind pull him down scheme, Ogun government alleges. And below that, on the banner there, we see Sudan crisis. FG spends $1.2 million to evacuate 2,400 Nigerians to Cairo by bus. Blames security reasons for huge cost. And below the pictorial, we see DG NITDA advocates for development of international cyber norms. And below the belt, transparency, new master plan vital for Niger Delta development. And that's according to Wabote. Banana Island, Lagos begins removal of illegal structures. And finally on the News Direct, I am always writing towards hope. Christy J. Get these and more on the Nigerian News Direct newspaper of today.
We'll move on quickly to the Blueprint newspaper there with the major headline, as lawmakers caution as Tinubu wades into National Assembly leadership tussle. Contestants intensify lobby. Let's guard against executive interference. Golu, I don't have dual citizenship, as he could tell Tinubu, and I bestowed Guinean citizenship on President-elect as democracy icon. Conde. And to other stories, suspected headers kill 2 soldiers, 15 others in Benue. Gunmen slay 6 miners in Plateau. SEC urges investors to expose illegal fund managers. Adama Guba, Binani withdraws court void suits against INEC. And blackout looms as FG plan to cut discos from national grid. Sudan, Nigeria spends $1.2 million on citizens' evacuation. This is coming from FG. And World Women's Day, World Malaria Day, vaccine for malaria treatment now accessible. That's according to the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria. And court strikes out property forfeiture suits against Bello as EFCC appeals. And NICON declared Friday as deadline for Hajj fair begins screening of medical theme. These are the major stories on the front page of Blueprint newspaper.
And on the Punch newspaper, we'll start from the very top where we see Obi attacks INEC for defending Tinubu. Atiku claims victory. Besides that, we see cash scarcity crippled Nigeria's economy, according to the United Nations. And finally, we see Tinubu's speaker aspirants meet on zoning behind closed doors. For the banner, we see Sudan conflict. Students lament slow evacuation. FG to pay $1.2 million. Only 15 out of 40 buses ready on Wednesday conveyed 750 students. Minister says cost covers 19-hour journey, security from Sudan to Cairo. And below the pictorial, of course, that's the pictorial of some Nigerians at the registration point in Sudan before the evacuation to Cairo, Egypt. And this was on Wednesday. So below that, we see 4,000 trucks to visit Lekki Port daily. And also, Lagos State Government demolishes illegal buildings on Banana Island. And finally, on the Punch, police arraign Lagos spare parts dealer for assaulting housewife. And that's it for the Punch newspaper this morning.
All right, we move on to The Guardian. There's a complete makeover of The Guardian cover page lately. It's beginning to look like The Guardian of UK, except for the fact that the other, it's a tabloid. The major story here is on the subsidy removal. Marketers in limbo over implementation. $15.5 billion foreign exchange demand for fuel importation. And that's huge. As court strike out EFCC suit against Kogi Governor Yaya Bello over asset for feature. I am unencumbered by scandal. Atiku replies Tinubu Syria loser jab. Nigeria has highest number of collapsed buildings in Africa, says Sun DG. And Owando takes delivery of Nigeria's first mass transit electric buses. Death, delay, frustration of Lagos Ibadan, endless road repair. And uncertainty trails emergence of new Alafi. These are the major stories on the front page of The Guardian.
And on the Business Day newspaper, we see here are Nigeria's 5 trillionaire listed companies. Combined revenue grew to 7.2 trillion naira in 2022. Interesting. And also, we see dollar price tickets fail to free airlines trapped funds. And below that, how social media pushed Nigerians to vote. Also, Owando takes delivery of electric buses for Lagos mass transit. And also, dismantling OMSL's secure anchorage. And we also see beside the pictorial, push for subsidy removal hits Naira redesign wall. You could get that story on page 2 and catch more on the Business Day of today by getting a copy of the paper. And that's it for the Business Day this morning.
And quickly we move on to the Leadership newspaper, and we will stay with stories that have not been highlighted by previously reviewed papers. No Nigerian has died in Sudan conflict, so that's coming from the federal government. And subsidy removal CSO kick against $800 million World Bank loan. And to other stories there, Adama Apple, Binani drops suits against Fintri, INEC, and others. And finally, Banana Island, Lagos begins removal of illegal structure. These are the major stories on the front page of Leadership newspaper.
And we move to this Nigeria this morning, still sticking to headlines that haven't been captured by other papers. We see food price inflation remains high globally, and that's according to World Bank. Tinubu to inaugurate flyover court building in Port Harcourt. Also, we see scarcity of new Naira notes hits FCT residents. Cry out. Adama supplementary poll. Binani withdraws suit against INEC. Fleeing wreck allegedly writes commission. Insists APC won exercise. We see a pictorial also of Governor Wike and also the governor-elect amongst other construction workers from Julius Berger during an inspection of some projects in Rivers State. And that's the much we can take for the newspaper review this morning, rather the newspaper headlines, and we're now joined by our reviewer this morning, and he is Mr. Nasir Lawal. He is the editor-in-chief of Dateline Nigerian Newspapers. Welcome to the show this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So before we move, too far, one story just caught my attention, and I would like to ask, what is really going on in Kenya with regards to this Kenya court issue on the pastor? I see Mr. Sunday smiling here. It's
like Kenya, like Nigeria.
Yes, it's an unfortunate situation, but yet also very interesting. Is it a case of hypnotism, or is it a case of blind faith? What exactly is the cause here?
Well, what's even his name will say, religion being the opium of the masses.
Karl Marx.
Thank you very much for that. This is a pastor, who succeeded in convincing his followers that they should actually engage in fasting so that they can starve themselves and hasten their transition so that they get to meet Jesus Christ. And Nigeria, people being who they are, so many people believed him and they actually starved themselves. Right now, a number of
95
graves have been uncovered. So many bodies have been exhumed, and this is only the beginning of the investigation. Maybe by the end of it, we are likely to see much more than the figure that we currently have.
That's amazing.
I want to ask, is this a problem that is, well, do we even call it a problem now? It's more like an issue or a scourge that is peculiar to Africans, where we see Africans investing so much in their belief and their religion. But then if you look at it on the flip side, we suffer the most in terms of development. So perhaps do we say, if we see such commitment to other ventures, aside our religious beliefs, maybe our situation would change?
Yeah, certainly, because if our leaders, can also involve all these religious, all these clerics, because of the influence that they have, possibly we may begin to see some changes, because right now there is some distrust between the leaders and the led, and for good reasons, because sometimes the leaders, the way they act, it's as if they don't have anything to do with the people that they are leading, and somehow the people tend to see hope, from this religious clerics. So because of that, they tend to believe all the things that their clerics will be telling them. So the government should also try and borrow a leaf from the religious leaders, so that the message that they have will always be believed by the people. Because unless they do that, then there is no way we can actually change that.
Right. You talk about collaborations, but another thing strikes me, which is the area of regulation. That's what we see in Kenya is similar to what we see here. On a number of times in Lagos, for instance, along the Mile 2 Maza axis, I've seen people of a particular denominations dancing inside the gutter, inside filth. Whether that is to the glory of God or to see whatever that message is, I find it very difficult to understand. Do you think we have come to the point where religious activities need some level of regulation? We have seen it. We are skeptical about that conversation in Nigeria because of the sensitivity, but we have seen what Rwanda has done with it. You want to be sure that the people who mount the pulpit have the right education, the right training, and commitment to nationhood before they mount that place and begin to dispense with doctrines, that negates the very essence of the country. Telling people to do things that you yourself and your family, for instance, are not willing to do.
Certainly, we need some form of regulation. That's just the fact, because we cannot continue, along this way. But sometimes it has to do with our level of development. Honestly, by the time we begin to see some level of prosperity, when people have enough to eat, enough to do, all the basic things that they want to do, they tend to start, withdrawing from all these religious. They actually see it as a form of maybe control, someone trying to control them when in reality they have, all the things that they want without waiting for anyone to tell them what to do. So maybe by the time we see some, more development, we're likely to also see a reduction of things like this. But honestly, we need some form of regulation, because you can see even with the social media, people are just posting whatever they feel like, and there is nobody to say do this or don't do this. And in the end, it's actually the whole country that is bearing the brunt for things like that.
All right, so before we go to the lead on the Daily Trust, let's just quickly move to Sudan, where we're seeing such an unfortunate sighting, and unfortunately a lot of our own compatriots have been caught in the web of what's going on there. But then again, this headline, FG spends 560 million naira to evacuate Nigerians by road. And there's also others that states that the government is spending around 1.2 million.
Yes, that's the conversion.
Exactly.
Of, that's even at the official rate. So if you break this to the black market, we'll be talking about 1 billion naira.
So much money. So much money. Perhaps you should say one or two things.
Well, this is something that was never planned. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is no budget for it. Maybe the government had to source it from somewhere. I also saw that the officials, trying to explain, to give a breakdown of how they arrived at that figure. But this is not a small amount of money. And, sometimes it's the transparency that we just want to see. Just tell us how you arrive at that amount, not just telling us that okay, you spent 500 plus in doing ABC. We want to see okay, what did you spend in transportation, what did you spend in buying the buses, what did you spend, just the breakdown, so that Nigerians will know okay, this is why we ended up with this amount. But to just give us the amount and say because of security, distance between Sudan and Egypt, where they have been taken through, honestly, it's not enough.
Now, there's also the narrative, sorry to cut you short, there's also the narrative that perhaps it's because of what we see in terms of the palatability of our education sector that has caused so many Nigerians to leave the country, and then in terms of infrastructure and what is available here in Nigeria that has made so many Nigerians to leave the country and move or emigrate to other countries such as Sudan, and that perhaps if the climate here was much better, we wouldn't have seen the numbers of that we are recording right now in Sudan or any other part of the country. Because I think in the last 5 years, for every major crisis that has been recorded, either in Africa or outside Africa, we've seen Nigerians being repatriated, which means that it shows the number of Nigerians that are currently outside in the diaspora. So does this speak to the level of our own development, or how much our countrymen are willing to go out there in search of greener pastures or better lifestyles?
Well, foreign education, for instance, is now a global reality. It's not just Nigerians, that go outside their country to acquire one or two education. Even people in the United States of America, in the United Kingdom, sometimes it has to do with, what you are trying to study. Some have clear advantage over others. Some will tell you if you want to study medicine, this and this countries are the ones that lead, when it comes to the training of doctors and what have you. But for Nigeria and Sudan, it's a long history, especially the northern part of the country. I remember even the first Grand Kadi that we had in Nigeria, came from Sudan, because when the northern part of the country was doing the Sharia, which was being referred to as the penal code, because I think Sudan got their independence in 1956 or so, so they had like that advantage over Nigeria, something that they have started, and we had to go to them, so that we learn one or two things. And then there are so many doctors you see in this country who were trained in Sudan. So honestly, Nigerians should not be worried about people going outside the country to acquire education. It's a global reality. You can't do everything here in Nigeria. But if we can do it, fine and good. But the fact that some are, even governments actually are the ones sponsoring most of the students that you see. I know Sokoto government is doing it. A number of states, Kano, they send them to India, to Uganda, to so many places, so that they can maybe focus on the education alone instead of remaining here in Nigeria and then be maybe carried away by all the things you see on social media and what
Still staying with Sudan, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it's Nigerians are affected, over 5,000 of them, we understand. And in fact, if not for the holidays, we would have had somewhere in the region of 10,000. But still staying with Sudan, does it appear, for instance, that we have learned any lessons from the crises that have happened everywhere? He spoke about Ukraine. We remembered how countries were making efforts to evacuate. We were studying the situation as if we had access to superior intelligence than some of the countries that the US 2 months before the war said they were very certain from intel that there was going to be an attack and started evacuation. Until the first strike, we were still studying the situations. And then we woke up and started telling students, find your way to Belarus border, find your way to Polish border. I mean, that is the toughest task, finding your way. When you find your way to a safe ground, what else do you need the government for? We have seen that played out everywhere. In South Africa, people were being maimed. I mean, it wasn't a war situation. Evacuation was a problem. And now at some point, we said we were discussing with the Egyptian government to help us evacuate. In fact, the federal government shamefully yesterday mentioned that some numbers have already been evacuated to Egypt. Those were not by any efforts of the government. They were people who found their way to the border, and by humanitarian consideration, the Egyptian government decided to move them over to their side. What is always wrong with the kind of premium that we place on a Nigerian life, especially in a crisis-prone area? Do we have a different approach to this evacuation, or we are just never ready for situations like this?
I think we need to, change our strategies completely, not just when dealing with people that are outside the country. Even when disasters happen here in Nigeria, the response is basically the same. But having some, foreign countries to come to your aid, I don't think that's anything to be like shameful about. Because if you look at the United States, so many of their citizens were actually rescued by Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia is like just, the Red Sea between the two of them. So because of that, they ended up evacuating so many Americans, so many Dutch, UK citizens, and what have you. So, but that does not change the fact that, the approach from Nigeria is always something that is beyond comprehension. How do you treat your citizens like that? When so many people are spending, in fact, mobilizing for war, just to save 1 or 2 of their citizens. Here we are, just talking about the monetary part of it, because that's where we see maybe 1 or 2 advantages for the officials that are involved in it. But honestly, if we want to be taken seriously, even by the Committee of Nations, this is something that we need to change. Whether Nigerians that are outside the country or within the shores of Nigeria. Honestly, anytime we have challenging moments, the government should do much more than it is doing at the moment.
All right, moving to other issues.
The leading headline on the
leading headlines, which has been lately. Well, you will understand why we have stayed with the human interest stories. Indeed. That's where more Nigerians are impacted. These are about some elites who are deciding who gets what and how. Tinubu is back, I'm sure you're aware. And the real fiscal lobby started with him having meetings with some interested parties. And now we hear that national dynamics votes delivery to determine National Assembly leadership. What do you make of some of this?
I think there are 2 different things. If you are talking about national dynamics,
talking about balancing,
and then if you are talking about vote delivery, then so there are 2 different things. Honestly, because the vote delivery is not the same, especially across the political zones. So you can't be talking about national dynamics, which, if I understand that correctly, means bringing all Nigerians on board so that we give everybody a sense of belonging. But if you are talking about vote delivery, then it means rewarding those, especially where you got most of your votes
winner
from.
Takes all.
So I think there are two different things, and I understand that actually the president-elect, is trying not to, some will say undermine, but not to like create two parallel governments, in Nigeria. And you can see, since he came back, all the attention, all the focus, has moved in his direction. And from what we heard, from people, especially those close to him, that even the fact that, he had to stay away from Saudi Arabia was actually because the president was there, and then he didn't want a situation whereby some will be going to him and then others will be going to the president, because he's still the president until May 29th. So rather than talk about national dynamics or vote delivery, and sadly for Nigerians, you and I have no say in this.
Absolutely.
This is something that the elites, like you said, will determine. I also saw a story saying that one of the speakership aspirants, that's the one from Borno, had already met with the president-elect. Probably they want to convince him to quit the race, because coming from the same state with the vice president, maybe it will be good for other zones to be considered with that. So politicians being politicians, if they think that's the best to reward and get the system going, fine and good. But they shouldn't forget the fact that arising from the elections we had, so many divisions, so many tension and what have you. So it will be good to come up with something that will show that national spread, show that everybody, is given the chance to show that, yes, you are also Nigerian, and then considered for all the positions that are available to be shared.
All right. Interesting. 30 seconds for this last question. We are saying, or hearing from the federal government, that Kano-Kaduna Road and the second Niger Bridge will be ready May 15, and we were asking, where is the Lagos-Ibadan Road? It appears it will defy this administration, the completion. In fact, I think one paper was recounting how delays and deaths have become the story of the Lagos-Ibadan Express.
No, the Lagos-Ibadan, actually, they said it will be delivered earlier. They said April 30th.
Yes, we are beyond April 30th, and it is not.
No, this April 20th
is okay, in a couple of days.
So in 3 days, that's what they said, that they will be. But, there is a caveat to actually, that, because they said, I think there is a part in between Ibadan also, where the government is trying to construct channel, so that water channel or something. So that part, will not be completed along with the rest of the road. So possibly by April 30th, we will see the road.
We keenly await.
Yeah, we keenly await.
Yes. Yeah. No, but everybody, that road is as good as this democracy. Yeah, we started from the...
But you can even see, even the Abuja-Kaduna, they actually said that they will leave that to the incoming administration.
Interesting. Interesting. That's the much we can bring you from today's headline. I hope you have enjoyed the insight and perspective that were brought to bear by our guest. I'm tempted to say in-house guest. It's not in-house. It's still a visiting guest, accorded all rights and privileges, as usual. Malan Nasrullah, the editor-in-chief, Dateline newspaper. Thank you very much once again for making it to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
And for those useful perspectives that you bring to this program always.
Thank you.
Always. It's a learning time for everybody on the show. And that's it on the newspaper review. At this time, we'll see you at the top of the hour.